Hey class, so I know it's been a little while since we did a reading lesson, but we're going to go ahead and continue with the text that we started the other day, reading pages 1 through 9. We're going to go ahead and continue and read pages 10 through 13 of Pioneers to the West now. So let's read this and keep in mind the text features that we talked about last week and continue to see how those develop in this reading.
Central Illinois, 1849. In 1848, an inspector visited a sawmill in California. A sawmill is a building where logs are cut into boards. In a ditch, the inspector noticed something glittering in the water. It turned out to be gold. Many people were inspired to travel west by posters like this. On the scene, helping people travel to California was big business during the gold rush. Many businessmen made more money by organizing trips to California than miners made by finding gold. At first, the sawmill's owner, John Sutter, was able to keep the discovery secret. But word got out, and soon thousands of people were flocking to California. The gold rush was on. People who went to California in search of gold became known as 49ers. They got this name because the gold rush began in 1849. Miners set up camps wherever they found gold. The trail of camps became known as the Golden Chain. If there was enough gold, a mining camp could grow into a town. Some of these towns still survive today. Bound for California. John McWilliams of Briggsville, Illinois, was not a typical 49er. He was often sick as a boy, and his mother and brother had both died of lung disease. But by 1849, when he was 16, John told his father he was going to California or die. John set out with 3 friends from home. Unlike many pioneers, he was never sick on the trail. In California, John did not have much luck when it came to mining. He and his friends did not know much about finding gold. He wrote, "The California gold diggings of which we thought so much didn't look like a bit as we thought they would. In my imagination, I thought I was going to dig gold out by the bucketful." Then, one day, John met a friend from home. He showed John how to use mining tools. John was a quick learner, and he found $100 worth of gold in one day. Early miners used rocker boxes to separate gold from other rocks in a river. John McWilliams. John's luck did not hold. By the spring of 1850, he and his friends decided to move on. John's adventures then took him to Panama in Central America and New Orleans, Louisiana. He finally settled in St. Louis, Missouri, and raised a family. His granddaughter became the famous chef Julia Child. This painting by artist Charles Christian Knoll is called Miners in the Sierra. Knoll painted it in 1851. A man named Levi Strauss made his fortune by inventing something the miners needed. He made a new kind of pants that could withstand the tough life of the miners. The jeans that many people wear today were invented by Levi Strauss.
All right, so now that we have finished our reading, let's go ahead and look at some close reading questions to get a little more out of the text that we just looked at. So the first question says, on page 10, something happened in California that caused many pioneers to move west. Can you recall what happened? And I actually pulled up page 10 right here to help us figure it out. And on page 10, we see that this first part, there was a sawmill that found gold. And they weren't able to keep it a secret for very long, right? So this is what happened. This started the gold rush. So on page 10, the gold rush started. That was what happened. Let's look at the next question. It says, can you explain how the discovery of gold in California affected others besides pioneers? And when I first read this question, I thought a lot about this text box that's right down here, this text feature that's right down here at the bottom. So we can go ahead and read that together. On the scene, helping people travel to California was big business during the gold rush. Many businessmen made more money by organizing trips to California than miners made by finding gold. So what I learned there is that one of the ways that it affected others besides pioneers was it brought money to a lot of other businesses besides just those people who were looking for gold, right? It brought money, like it says here, to those who were organizing trips. And I'm sure it brought money to a lot of other businesses that were nearby the place where the gold was found, right, in California. And they were able to start a lot more businesses there because there was a lot more money in that economy. Going to this question, this is a two-part question, so we'll read the first part first. Can you explain why John McWilliams decides to leave his home in Illinois? So this is the first experience, this is our first encounter with John McWilliams on page 11. So we can go ahead and read that. It says, bound for California. John McWilliams of Griggsville, Illinois, was not a typical 49er. He was often sick as a boy, and his mother and brother had both died of lung disease. But by 1849, when he was 16, John told his father he was going to California or die. John set out with 3 friends from home. Unlike many pioneers, he was never sick on the trail. So what I learned from this, it might not exactly say why he decides to leave home, but it does say that he's going to California and that he's not a typical 49er. So even though it says he's not a typical 49er, that doesn't mean he's not a 49er. And we know from up here that a 49er was someone who went to California in search of gold. So the reason he decides to leave home is because he's searching for gold in California. And then the second part of the question says, how would you compare what John McWilliams expected to find in California with what he actually found? And this question reminded me of the quote on the next page. On page 12, there is this quote from him in the top text box. So we can go ahead and read that whole text box and find out how these two experiences compared to each other. In California, John did not have much luck when it came to mining. He and his friends did not know much about finding gold. He wrote, the California gold diggings of which we thought so much did not look a bit as we thought they would. In my imagination, I thought I was going to dig gold out by the bucketful. So we can compare these two experiences, the experience he thought he was going to have and the experience he turned out to have. So what we learn here is that he didn't find nearly as much gold as he thought he was going to find, right? And then down here we find out that he starts finding a way to earn a little bit more gold and to find more gold, but still in the end he ends up searching for other opportunities in other lands. And then we have one more question here. On page 10, the poster advertises a ship traveling to the area of the gold rush. Can you elaborate on the effect this poster had on people? And so what we're thinking about here is how this poster, the effect this poster had on people, how this poster affected people. So as I look at it, I'm thinking that this is really trying to push people to go to this incredible land with all of this gold available, right? And it's the gold rush. So everybody's rushing there to find the gold. They're so excited about it. They're so excited about the opportunities that lie ahead. So really this poster is just continuing to expand on that idea, right? That there are so many opportunities in California for them to earn their wealth. So our vocabulary. Our first word is bound. And it says here, it's found on page 11, and we see it says bound for California. Bound for California. And this type of bound for California, we know it was talking about John McWilliams when he was trying to head to California, right? So we know that this type of bound means headed for or going toward. And then some other bounds. Bound has a lot of different definitions. So one bound could be walk or run with large strides. So a giant would bound along, right? They would walk in huge strides. And then you can also say enclosed. So that has to do with bound as in boundary. So the boundaries of a field would be enclosed. They would be what encloses the field. So that's the out of bounds would be what lies outside of that enclosure. So the bound is kind of that outer edge. But for right now, for our definition, we're going to go ahead and just say bound means going toward a specified place. And then our second vocab word is typical. This appears on page 11, and we actually read this together, but we'll read it one more time. The sentence says, John McWilliams of Griggsville, Illinois, was not a typical 49er. He was often sick as a boy, and his mother and brother had both died of lung disease. So he was not the typical one because he was not super strong and, he was prone to illness, so he was not the typical one, because the typical one would be strong and super capable and, wouldn't have any illnesses that would keep them from being able to make the trek to California. So that means the typical means kind of classic or model. So the typical student is maybe the model student or the classic student. But it can also mean kind of common or usual. So it's just a typical day in the classroom. There's nothing special that's happening today. We aren't having like a field trip or anything crazy happening like that. So that might be a use of typical. So in this case, we're going to say typical means being the usual or classic example of something. All right, so for to do, we have use each vocabulary word in a sentence. So the two vocab words were bound and typical. Bound meaning heading toward, and typical meaning just common or usual. And then respond to the two prompts below. So the first prompt says, reread page 10 and 11 of Pioneers to the West. So you can go back to that part in the video if you would like. And then respond to this question. What caused so many people to flock to California in 1849? Use evidence from the text to support your answer. So this was that first question that we went over as well, if you need some hints on where to find some evidence from the text. And then the second prompt says, using evidence from the text, answer the following question about pages 10 through 13 of Pioneers to the West. Reread pages 10 through 13. Select an event that happened and reasons for why that event happened. Write a few sentences that explain what happened and why. Remember to use signal words such as because to help you explain why the event happened. So you can go ahead and write out that answer or type it out or something, and then you can take a picture of it to show that you did it and to show that you were engaging with this lesson, and you can send that to me in Class Dojo messages just so that I can see your work and see the progress that you're making. Or if you just followed along and don't have time to answer these questions, writing it down or anything, you can just talk through maybe some of your answers instead. All right, thanks class, bye.